Hey guys, and welcome back to the Ramble. I am your humble hermit host, my reality here, soaked in caffeine. And this is, and you shall know them by the pronouns that they keep. It is very easy to figure out who is whom and who believes what. That is to say, it is very easy to figure out who to avoid like the plague. At least if one spends any amount of time on that most hallowed platform of mediocrity and hysterics known as Twitter. The most ardent supporters of all that is good and noble and true are, invariably, the ones who are obsessed with them good old pronouns. It seems to be a mark of their tribe, something tattooed on their very souls. If NPCs are burdened with souls, that is, which I believe is open for discussion. An NPC is, after all, an NPC. And this will undoubtedly get me hunted down for hate speech. NPC is a no-no term now, hate spoken by hate speech merchants on their hate speech crusade against the righteous hordes of indignation and moral superiority. I'll do my very best to get information about my whereabouts post-re-education incarceration smuggled out on toilet paper, or something to that effect, when the pronoun-squads finally manage to smoke me out of my hole. Please come rescue me when that time comes. Bring lawyers, guns and money. And wine. I have been told that I cannot possibly mean anything of that which I write, ramble, rant and rave, and that I only write it in order to be provocative and so garner attention for myself and my ramblings, thus being liable to rake in all that dough that inevitably come rolling into all those who oppose feminism and its ilk. Because we all know that the big money lies in opposing feminism and the social justice hive mind, not in defending it. And this is just about as real as it gets. Feminism is such an underdog, as we are all bloody well aware. There is no monetary incentive, nor is there any power to be had for the high and mighty feminist hordes to keep the narrative about the poor and oppressed woman moving ever onwards, wobbling its way into the sunset one benzodiazepine sustained wonky wobble at a time. Nor do they hold any influence or wield any amount of power worth talking about. They are absolutely powerless. So powerless, in fact, that everyone accepts their drool and dribble as fact. Spread by politicians and by news outlets and by academia and by schools and by kindergartens and by parents and by actors and by just about anybody. And never mind that, this influence and power and all that good cash belongs to our tribe. Our ragtag crew of misfits and wife-beaters who just can't find any woman willing to touch our peepees, and so take it out on all womankind by refusing to accept the dominant narrative as presented by the opinion wielders who hold no power except the ability to sway everyone to their thought, to pressure and lobby and more or less make one hell of a mess of things merely by pouting, screaming and throwing irrational temper tantrums, much like spoiled children who cannot stand not getting their way in life. And you shall know them by the pronouns that they keep, one more ridiculous than the last. For everyone has to stand out in some way, despite being collectivized to the extreme. Everyone has to shine like the sun with the mighty quirkiness of their individual pronouns, an identity so strange and so rare as to, of course, render them marginalized, oppressed and downtrodden in one way or another. Sure, some labels and some pronouns will grant them some privilege, but it is easily countered by other labels and pronouns reversing this privilege. Besides, it is an easy identifier of group identity, something tossing them into the pile of bodies eagerly awaiting their decay and decrepitude, wherein the individual supposedly don't matter much, even when it does, because all these goddamned causes that are championed are very much selfish in nature, very much individualistic and very little collectivistic, bordering on narcissistic. I feel this way about that. They'll shriek as they shamble their way onto the public square, and so this is something that impacts all that label themselves similar to me. And everyone must stop and everyone must listen because they have this certain label, this precious pronoun, and so not listening and nodding would be some manner of discrimination and oppression of a marginalized group, mostly identified by a common or uncommon pronoun or label which grants them the ability and the God-given right to speak on behalf of that group, even when solely speaking about their own individual hang-ups, neuroses or petty problems that could easily be dealt with by growing a thicker skin and understanding that sometimes, most times in fact, things are not a product of discrimination. Though, of course, and as it transpires, they are well aware of this. And this is proven when one looks to the microaggression thing, the unconscious bias thing, and other such nonsense designed just so that one cannot speak against it consciously, because the offending act is not a conscious act. Thus, it is still discrimination. They are damned good at covering all their bases, and damned good at ruling through reinventing language to suit their needs. Those who are guilty of discrimination are not aware of it, and so it is not their fault. It is the fault of society, which have imprinted these unconscious biases into the minds and thoughts of everyone. Only by subscribing to their ideology can one cleanse oneself of this and see the world and one's own rotten behavior because of the world as it truly and really is, and so make amends according to one's own pronouns and labels and group identity. And some must make more amends than others, some must pay more penance than the rest. But all are sinners in some way or other, at least to the eyes of those who lack the ability to see the world through the eyes of other people, who seem to be lacking somewhat in empathy, despite pretending to have it in droves. I struggle quite a lot to believe in the sincerity of those who shout the loudest and show their infallible virtue the most. It is, I must admit, difficult to believe in the sincerity of someone's belief, morals and convictions, when all they do when speaking about it is to make out how good, moral and righteous they are for supporting this or that cause. Humility, it appears, is not the greatest strength of these stalwart champions for whatever cause is currently in vogue. Considering that it also tends to change as the trends change, as the cause célèbre unavoidably changes, it is even more difficult to believe in the sincerity of their fight. It is almost enough to make one believe that it's all about virtue signaling for woke points, all about gathering as much admiration as possible from the social media-infected world in which we now dwell, wherein all our movements and opinions, all our virtues and all our vices are constantly monitored, where one must always outdo the other in moral righteousness and in fighting the good cause, whatever the hell that cause is at this particular time, in this particular hour. And this is not to say that I believe everyone who champions a cause, that everyone who burns with a desire to do good are feigning it for attention. Of course not. But when that cause changes as the wind changes, when there is no constant, when there is this cause, that cause, all the other causes, mostly stirred up by reading one headline and then getting all up in arms about it, I find it very hard to believe in the sincerity of people's convictions. It then becomes all about the immediate outrage, which is replaced by a new outrage next morning as the previous one is forgotten. The pronouners had their communal hissy fit, and so they are done with it. Or they are embarrassed and don't talk much about it after more information is unearthed, rendering their outrage a phony one, as it usually is. The case of the Covington kids is of particular interest, of course. Not only does it show how quick these non-judgmental, tolerant, inclusive wielders of 1,000 pronouns are to intolerant judgment, it shows how remarkably dishonest, how remarkably muckraking the mass media manufacturers of make-believe news stories are in their quest for outrage clicks and outrage bucks. When the ones who are supposed to spread the news are so quick to judgment and so hastily outraged, how in the world are we supposed to believe the rest of the world can manage to take it easy, to not go into full-blown outrage mode the moment someone says or does something perceived to be so horribly outrageous as to invoke the wrath and fury of the general population? Waiting for information is old news. We don't have time for that in the information age, because all information comes flying at us at lightning speed. And so too do our emotions. The immediate outrage comes quickly and leaves quickly, like a quick fuck in the bathroom of a public library, leaving nothing but sweat, cum stains and a strange sensation of disappointment. One can train oneself to not immediately fly into full frenzied outrage mode by regulating one's emotions as well as lengthening one's attention span. But where's the fun in that? Shit, it's no fun. It's straight up boring. It's good to let loose, you know. Just let fly and consequences be damned. Full tarred rage incoming. Roar and scream and bellow and let out all that anger, all that frustration, all that righteous and justified adult toddler anger, angling for a bite or two so that one can yell and scream and curse some more at those who dare propose one waits before reacting in the most violent, destructive, aggressive and terrible manner possible. But that cannot be done. For that inner feeling of hopelessness, that deeply buried root of the anger, that maladjusted thing that lies somewhere deep within that causes all this rage and wrath and ruin must be let loose and must be let out. People who are quick to anger tend to burn within, tend to be angry by something other than that thing that sparked their rage and wrath and ruin. It's just not something people are willing to look at. Our societies have externalized everything and internalized nothing. Nothing except guilt and shame and doubt that gnaws and bites and eats one up small nibbles at a time. The only way to fix society is for people to fix themselves, in my humble opinion. And that is fixing themselves for themselves first and foremost. Healing, you see, is a fantastic thing. And people need to stop blaming everything on something else. People need to learn humility. Need to not take themselves so damned fucking seriously all the bloody time. In order for our societies to become less narcissistic, I believe it is prudent that we all learn to look at ourselves, to gaze within, despite this sounding rather self-contradictory. We need to look at ourselves in depth, not in the superficial label me this and label me that way that is so popular, not in the superficial pronoun way. For that is what it is, superficial. No, we all need to take a deep breath and look at ourselves in a deeply introspective, I would even dare say spiritual way. It is not always pretty, the things one notices about oneself and one's own behaviour. Believe you me, I know. Yet it is precisely this that makes it so important. Seeing one's shadow side gives one the ability to control it. Not to suppress it, but to control it. The yin, after all, does need a yang. External things are often beyond our control. Shit happens that will ruin your day, sometimes even your life. And this is just how it is, and one cannot control it, so why bother trying? The internal thing, the way we deal with it, are not beyond our control. It takes practice and it takes patience, but one's emotions and one's behaviours and one's way of acting and reacting can be controlled and overcome, rendering one strong enough to stand strong and tall and mighty in any storm. It's just a damned shame that this is labelled as toxic by the pronoun squads. Just a damned shame that this is dubbed toxic masculinity and so dismissed out of hand. Regulating and controlling one's emotions as adult human beings is no good no more. One has to scream and roar and rage. One has to cry and weep and throw all one's emotions out into the wind, so that everyone else picks up on them and does the same. Because that is how it is at this moment in time, sick and depraved though it is. I am hysteria, hear me roar. I am immediate, hear me roar. I am outrage, hear me roar. I am a toddler, hear me roar. And despite all the roaring, it amounts to little else than a fart in a storm of farts. I am a fart, hear me roar. And you shall know them by the pronouns that they keep. And that, I think, was that for this ramble. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it more than my previous ramblings. Please like, share, subscribe and all that good stuff. Check out the links down below and I'll catch you next time. This is Muriel here, signing off.